Welcome back, students. This video is to help with the second review for our final exam over our first semester material. So this one has 13 questions, and we are reviewing how to work with equations of lines. That means slope, your y-intercepts, and so on. But not just equations of lines, but we'll also, towards the end, get into inequalities as well. So first thing is slope. So remember that slope is how your line moves. It's your change of y's over your change of x's. Your slope formula will be provided for you, as well as your slope-intercept formula, as well as point slope form. All right, so question number 1 really does not require any work. You have 4 graphs that are provided, and you need to determine whether that slope is positive, negative, 0, or undefined. So when you read a graph, just like I read that sentence, you read from left to right. So let's do the easiest one first. Which one of your lines looks like it's going up from left to right? That's your slope that is positive. Okay, so which one goes down from left to right? That slope is going to be negative. Which line stays the same going from left to right? That's going to be the slope of 0. And last but not least, the one that goes straight up and down, that is your slope that is undefined. Please make sure that as for any homework assignment, you're going through and checking your answers and correcting your mistakes if you make them throughout. But question number 2 now is going to be graphing a line given the provided information. So on question number 2, they give us the slope. Okay, because I have a slope of a negative, that means my line's going to go down from left to right, but I need to know where to start. And so we need an ordered pair to do that. Commonly, it's going to be the y-intercept, but this one's not a y-intercept. They just give me the ordered pair 5, 2. So 5 is my x-coordinate. So on the x-axis, I'm going to find 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the y-coordinate is 2. So on the y-axis, I'd find 2. And where would those two lines intersect? Right here. So notice that on Alex, it's pretty nice because if you look at the vertical line, it's going through 5. And if you look at the horizontal line, it's going through the y, which is at 2. So we're going to click and plot our point. And then we're going to get the line tool, plot that same point, and then now we're going to move from here. And where we're going to move, how we're going to move is negative, which means we're going to go down 3. So down 1, 2, 3, and then we need to move to the right 1 because 3 can be written as the fraction 3 over 1. So negative 3 over 1. So we go down 3 to the right by 1. Notice that my line is going down, which is a good indicator that this is right because my slope was negative and this was supposed to be a negative slope. All right, question number 3. What we're going to be doing in question number 3 is also graphing a line, but this time, okay, it's given to us in slope-intercept form. So remember that slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. So it's still telling us how to move with the slope, and it's also giving us a point where to start, except this time it's the very special point called the y-intercept. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my line tool. And the first point that I'm going to plot is going to be at my y-intercept, which is the number directly after x, which is a negative 2. So on the y-axis, my first point gets plotted at negative 2. And then my slope is negative 3 again, which means I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, and to the right by 1. Question number 4 is also graphing your line in slope-intercept form. So get your line tool, look at what's the number directly after x. If it's positive, if it's a negative, mine's a positive 4. So on the y-axis, find that point and plot a point. So mine's at positive 4, so I plotted a point at positive 4. The slope tells you how to move. Once again, mine's negative, which means I'm going to go down. Okay, if it's positive, I'd go up. If it's negative, go down, and then always move to the right. So I'm going to go down by 1, and I'm going to move to the right. 1, 2, and plot my second point. And there's my line that's been graphed. Question number 5, I want to do the same way that I did the other ones, where I want to know what my y equals mx plus b is. But for this one, you're going to be given your equation in standard form. So first, before you can identify your slope and your y-intercept, you need to solve for y. So notice I need to get y by itself. Y is attached to 5, but this 3x term, notice x should be on the right side. This is on the left side. I need to move it. So my opposite of a positive 3 is going to be a minus 3x on both sides. These cancel out, leaving with 5y is equal to, I need to put the x term first, so I'm going to put the minus 3x. And then comes my b, which in my case is positive 15. And then y is being multiplied by 5, so I need to divide both sides by 5. So everything gets divided by 5. 5 divided by 5 cancels, leaving me with y equals negative 3 over 5 can't simplify, so I'm just going to leave it as negative 3 over 5. That still has an x with it. And then positive 15 divided by 5 would give me positive 3. All right, so now the problem is just like the last ones where I identify my slope. My number in front of x is now negative 3 over 5, and my y-intercept is positive 3. So I'll get my line tool, and on that y-axis, I find positive 3 and plot a point. And then negative tells me to go down 1, 2, 3, and to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to plot my second point. And now I have plotted my line. So basically, numbers 3, 4, and 5 are the same question, except for question number 5, you need to first solve for y, so then you can identify your slope and your y-intercept. For question number 6, notice that it's either going to be y equals or just x equals. You're not going to have both variables. So if you're not going to have both variables, then that means you're only guaranteed to go through one of your axes. If you have both variables, you're guaranteed to go through both axes. But this case, I only have x equals 3, which means that I'm only guaranteed to go through the x-axis at 3. So I'm going to plot a point at 3. And this is telling me everywhere x is 3. So I'm going to plot another point where this ordered pair would be at x is 3. All right, so this means that I'm only going to have this vertical line right here. So if you have x equals a number, it's going to be a vertical line. And if you have just y equals a number, that's going to be a horizontal line. Again, the reason why I knew it was going to be one of those special cases was because I only had one variable, which meant that it was only going to go through one of my axes. Question number 7, we're going to get into inequalities now. Okay, so question number 7, very similar to question number 6, only instead of having x equals a number, I have x is greater than a number. All right, so similarly, I'm going to get my line tool, and at negative 6, I'm going to plot a point, and then I'm going to go vertically up or down to another point at negative 6, because I'm only going to go through x at negative 6. Because, okay, one of the differences between equations and inequalities is saying that this negative 6 is a solution. So if I plug in negative 6, is that more than negative 6? That's false. So if you're working with an inequality versus an equation, you have to check to see, are you going to have a dashed line or a solid line? So over here, you didn't have this option for the last question because it was an equation. It had to be a solid line. But since this is an inequality, we're going to have the option to make our line dashed, which means that this negative 6, the boundary, is not a part of the solution. So for me, mine's not a part of the solution. If it has the or equal to, then it would be. Mine's not, which makes it a dashed line. But then I also need to shade. So this is another button that was not available on the last question because the last question was an equation and this one's an inequality. So what number is bigger than negative 6? So look on your x-axis, because in my case, I'm working with the x's. What number is larger than negative 6? Well, 10 is larger than negative 6. So I'm going to click right on top of 10, and now automatically this entire part of my coordinate plane gets shaded, and this represents all of my solutions that would make this inequality be true. So make sure that you are on the lookout for, do you have an equation or an inequality that you're graphing? Okay, so if it's an inequality, you have to think, is it a solid line or a dashed line? And then also, which side are you going to shade? So question number 8 is also an inequality. This one, it has both variables, which means it's going to go through both axes. I need to get my boundary line first. So my y-intercept is positive 3. So on the y-axis, I plot a point up at positive 3. My slope is negative 4. So I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then over to the right by 1. So this is my boundary line. I either need to make it solid or I can make it dashed. In my case, it says or equal to, which means that I want these solutions to be a part, these points on my boundary line to be a part of my solution. So I want it to be solid. And then which side of the graph am I going to shade? So in order to figure that out, I need to use what's called a test point. So test point, I'm going to try to figure out which ones give me a true solution. So pick any point that you want as long as it's not on the line. So 0, 0, the origin is a very common test point, and plug it in. So this is my x, this is my y. So my inequality is y is greater than or equal to negative 4x plus 3. So I'm going to replace my y with 0 is greater than or equal to negative 4. I replace my x with 0 and then plus 3. So is 0 greater than or equal to, this is just 0, positive 3. So is 0 more than 3? This is false. So because it's false, it means I'm not shading where 0, 0 is. So if it was 0, 0 was true, I'd shade where 0, 0 is. It's false. That means I need to go to the other side and click over there and shade the opposite side since my test point was false. If it was true, I would have shaded on top. I would have clicked right where my test point was, but since it was false, that means I have to shade on the side opposite. For question number 9, it says write an equation. So we're getting back into equals. So notice that it has an equal sign. So I'm going to go ahead and first get my equal sign. That has a slope and a y-intercept. So because it has a slope and a y-intercept, it means I want to use that slope-intercept form. So y equals mx plus b. Now, I need to plug in my values. So my slope is 3 over 2. So instead of writing m, I'm going to replace that with 3 over 2. And then my y-intercept, my b is negative 4. So if I try to type in a plus a negative 4, that's not possible. So a negative 4 is the same thing as a minus 4. So I'm just going to type in negative 4. So here's my equation. Now I'm going to get my line tool. Notice that the shading and the change from a solid to a dashed line, those tools are not available because we're not working with an inequality now. We're back to equations. So we're going to click on the line tool. We're going to plot our y-intercept on the y-axis down at negative 4, and then the slope is positive, so we're going to go up 1, 2, 3, and then always move to the right. In my case, I'm moving to the right by 2. So this slope is positive. My line's going up as I read it from left to right, so that's good news. Okay, and then as always, check before you move on to your next question. All right, so question number 10 now. We're not graphing. Now we're going to start writing equations of lines given these different qualities. So it says a line that passes through this ordered pair and has this slope. And we're going to write the equation in point slope form. So pay attention, see what it tells you to write it in. This tells me point slope form, so I'm going to look on my formula sheet, and that's going to be the formula y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x1. So my slope, that's the m. That's the letter m that we use because it tells you how to move. And then this is an ordered pair. So we're going to label this one as x and y. And this is our first ordered pair, so we're going to label it as x1, y1. So over here, I'm going to erase my m, and I'm going to replace it with what I identified as m over here, which is negative 3 over 2. And then I'm going to erase my x1, and I'm going to replace it with 10. And then I'm going to erase my y1, and I'm going to replace it with negative 5. So if I try to type this in, it's not going to let me. Y minus, okay, if I type in y minus negative 5, notice it doesn't like that. Don't use two signs. You're in Algebra 1 now. Don't use two signs. What sign are you going to use? So this is a double negative, and just like in the English language, a double negative means it's really a positive. So this is going to change to y plus 5 equals negative 3 over 2, and then in parentheses x minus 10. Everything else is good because everything else just has one sign. So I'm going to just go ahead and type in what I have written over there. So y plus 5 equals negative 3 over 2, and then I need to move to the right and then get my parentheses x minus 10, close parentheses. So that's all we need to do for that one. Because it wanted the equation in point slope form, it meant that I got to use any point on the line. It didn't have to be the special y-intercept. It got to be any point on the line. But that won't always be the case. Okay? Sometimes we're going to need to write an equation where we are given or where we need to find whatever the y-intercept is. All right, so question number 11, here we're given a line. First thing I notice is that this line's going down, which means that it's going to have a negative slope. Another thing that I noticed is that on the y-axis, it doesn't cross through at a nice place. Mine crosses through at 1 point something. It's in between 1 and 2. I don't know if it's at 1.5. It might be. It might be at like 1.55. I don't know. So because it's not a nice integer y-intercept, what we're going to need to do is pick a different point on the line. Okay, so here's one. Here's a point on the line. And that ordered pair is 2, 1. That's just any point on the line. And then I also need to know you always need to know what the slope is. So the slope, m, is negative because it's going down. And then how much does it go down? So it goes down 2 until it reaches the next point. So this is going to be negative 2. And then it goes over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So simplify your fraction. Feel free to use Desmos to simplify your fractions. So mine's negative 2 over 8, which simplifies, if I click the fraction button, is negative 1 over 4. All right, so negative 1 over 4 is the slope. So this is a point on the line. This is the slope, which means, once again, I'm going to use the point slope form. Okay, if I knew the y-intercept, I would use my slope-intercept form, but I don't, which means I just need to use the point slope form. So I'm going to first erase my m in this formula and replace it with the negative 1 over 4. And then I'm going to erase my x1 and I'm going to replace it with the positive 2. And then I'm going to erase the y1 and replace it with the y-coordinate of my point, which is 1. All right, so if I need to, I can solve this for y. Since it just says find any equation, I can just go ahead and type this in. I'm going to go ahead and solve for y just to make sure that we're good at that skill. So first thing is get rid of the parentheses. Parentheses mean multiply. So I still have y minus 1 equals, but this is going to give me negative 1 over 4 times x. And then negative 1/4 times negative 2, I can use a calculator for that. So negative 1/4 and then times by negative 2, that gives me 1/2. So then I'm going to have a plus, that's positive, so a plus 1 over 2 here. I need to get y by itself. Right now I'm minusing 1, so the opposite of a minus 1 would be a plus 1. So I'm going to plus 1 on both sides. And this is going to give me y is equal to, I still have negative 1/4 x. My slope is still negative 1/4. I didn't want to add 1 to that. What I'm doing is I'm adding 1 to the like term. So 1 plus 1/2 is going to be 1 and 1/2, or that is the improper fraction of 3 over 2. All right, so for this question, if you'd like to put it in terms for your slope-intercept, you can. If you wanted to leave it in point slope form, that is fine as well. Main thing is that your slope stays the same, okay, and then you just use whichever formula you'd like to use and plug that in. We're nearing the end of our equations review, and towards the end of our equations unit, we talked about what it meant to be parallel lines and perpendicular lines. So parallel lines are lines that never intersect, and perpendicular lines are lines that always intersect, but they intersect at a single point. And what's special about them geometrically is that they intersect to form 4 90-degree angles. All right, so algebraically, this is what you need to know about parallel lines. Parallel lines are going to have the same slope because they never intersect, which means that they have to move the same way. So they have to have the same slope. Versus perpendicular lines have what's called the opposite reciprocal slope. So opposite means change the sign. If one's positive, the other one will be negative. And then reciprocal means flip the fraction around. So if it's not a fraction, write it as a fraction. So this line, for me, I have y equals 7x minus 8. So my slope is what's in front of x, which my slope is positive 7. Or if I write that as a fraction, is 7 over 1. So that means slope parallel, so the symbol for parallel is a double L. The parallel slope is the same, so 7 over 1, or just 7. Slope perpendicular, however, is opposite reciprocal. So since these slopes are positive, it means the perpendicular line is going to have an opposite, so that'll be a negative slope, and then flip the fraction around, that's going to be 1 over 7. All right, so now all I need to do is record that. The slope of any line parallel would be the same as this line, which in my case was 7, and the perpendicular slope is opposite reciprocal, which is going to be negative 1 over 7. And then question number 13 continues on with using parallel and perpendicular, But this time, we're going to actually write equations of the line that is parallel or perpendicular to a given line, but go through a given point. So first thing first, you always need to know the slope of the line as you're working on writing an equation. So I'm going to start off with my slope. This slope is -4, which means any slope parallel is also going to be -4. And any slope perpendicular would be opposite reciprocal, which would be +1/4. Find the equation of the line that is parallel, excuse me, parallel and passes through this point. All right, so this point is just a random point on the line. So I'm going to use the point slope formula. So y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus x1. And now I'm going to erase and I'll replace. So first I'm going to erase my m and I'm going to replace it with slope parallel, which slope parallel is -4. And then I'm going to erase and replace x1. And it's going to get replaced with the x coordinate, which is 6. And then I'm going to erase and replace y1, and I'm going to replace it with -2. All right, so this is going to become y plus 2 is equal to -4, and then in parentheses, x minus 6. I need to get rid of those parentheses. Parentheses mean multiply, so I'm going to distribute. That leaves me with y plus 2 equals -4x, and then -4 times -6 is +24. Need to get y by itself, so the opposite of a plus 2 is -2. I'm not going to do that to my x term. I still have a -4x, but I'm now going to have 24 minus 2, which is going to give me +22. All right, so that's going to be my parallel line equation. Now I need to go for perpendicular. So same thing, only difference is, so I'm still going to have my y plus 2 equals, I'm going to have a different slope. Okay, since it's going through the same ordered pair, that's why I still have a y plus 2. But now instead of having a -4, which was my slope before, now I'm going to have a 1/4. Parentheses, and then I still have my x minus the x coordinate, which is 6. So get rid of parentheses by multiplying through. This gives me y plus 2 is equal to 1/4 times x. And then again, use a calculator. You're going to be allowed to use a calculator on your final. So I'm taking 1/4 and I'm multiplying that by -6. And if it doesn't already, give it to as a fraction, put it into a fraction form, and this is -3/2. So I'm going to write -3 minus 3/2. And then I move the 2 over by -2 on both sides. This is still y equals 1/4 x. I still need that slope to be just 1/4, but now I need to take -3/2 minus 2. So I'm going to type in -3/2 and then -2, which gives me -7/2. So since it's negative, I'll put a minus and then 7/2. Last but not least, I'll take my answers that I have shown on my work page and I'll type them into the appropriate boxes. So this is my line parallel, which meant that it has the same slope. So y equals -4x, and then plus 22 means that it would go through the y-axis at 22. And then for my equation of my line perpendicular is going to be y equals +1/4, so opposite reciprocal slopes, and then -7/2 means that on the y-axis it would go through at -3.5, so it's not at a nice integer value. And then as always, since this is a homework, please check your work as you go through. We should now have a perfect score on equations of lines. It also reviewed some inequalities for us, and hopefully we are confident and comfortable with that section.